I get it, you're staring at a wall of specs and wondering if you're about to drop a serious chunk of cash on a camera that will sit half-used in a corner, or actually become the workhorse that finally lets you pull off the live production look you've been dreaming about. The fear of buying the wrong tool is real, especially when the gear you're eyeing sits in the professional price bracket and promises to replace a whole rack of equipment. You want to know, will this camera actually fit my workflow, hold up when the lights go low, and let me focus on the story instead of wrestling with menus? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Blackmagic Design Studio Camera 6K Pro lands squarely in the middle of that decision-making crossroads. It's marketed as a broadcast-ready camera that packs advanced features into a form factor that looks more like a traditional camcorder than a cinema rig. That positioning tells you two things right away. It's built for environments where you need reliable, repeatable results, and it expects you to have at least a modest production setup already in place. If you've been using a mix of DSLR footage, a separate ATEM switcher, and a handful of external recorders, this camera is trying to bring a lot of those pieces together into a single package. First off, the ease of use factor is where many live production cameras trip up. Blackmagic's UI leans heavily on the company's DaVinci Resolve mindset, which means the menu layout is organized around the same color-coded workflow you see on a desktop. For someone who's already comfortable editing in Resolve, the learning curve feels shallow. You can pull up ISO, shutter speed, and white balance with a few taps, and the on-screen waveform and false color tools are right there. No need to hook up an external monitor. In a real-world rehearsal scenario, I've seen crews set the camera on a tripod, walk through a talkshow segment, and instantly see exposure changes on the built-in display. That immediate visual feedback cuts down on the let's roll and fix it in post habit that can cost both time and budget. Autofocus confidence is a common anxiety point for anyone moving from a manual lens world into a hybrid setup. The Studio Camera 6K Pro uses Blackmagic's dual-pixel style autofocus system, which is decent for subjects that stay relatively steady. Think a news anchor at a desk or a presenter moving slowly across a stage. The focus motor is responsive enough that you can nudge the focus ring while watching the focus peaking overlay, and the camera will lock in within a half second. It's not the kind of eye tracking you get on a high-end mirrorless, but for a controlled studio environment it removes the need for a dedicated focus puller in many cases. If you plan on shooting fast-moving sports or wildlife, you'll still want to rely on manual focus or a dedicated follow-focus system. Low light behavior is where the 6K sensor shines. The Super 35 sensor delivers clean, high dynamic range footage up to 13 stops, and when you drop down to 200 ISO you still retain usable detail without the typical 6K noise floor you see on cheaper cinema cams. In a practical test setting up a small interview space with a single 5600K LED panel at about 30 feet, you can pull the lights down to a soft, cinematic dimness and the camera still produces a usable image with only a hint of grain. The built-in ND filters, which come in 3 stops, 2, 4, and 6, let you keep your aperture wide open for shallow depth of field without overexposing the sensor, a feature you'll appreciate when you need that film look on a Livetto Stream production. Stabilization, however, is where the camera shows a clear limitation. There's no in-body image stabilization (IBIS), so you're entirely dependent on the lens you pair with it or external rigs. If you're planning to handhold a 6K cam for a run-and-gun documentary, you'll quickly feel the need for a gimbal or a shoulder rig. That's not a deal-breaker if your workflow is mostly fixed-camera studio talk shows, news desks, or multi-camera live events, but it does mean you should budget for additional stabilization gear if your use case calls for mobility. Speaking of lenses, the EF mount opens up a massive ecosystem. You can drop a Canon 2470mm f/2.8 right in the body and get instant, familiar performance, or you can reach for older Cine lenses with the right adapters and still maintain the full sensor coverage. The upside is you're not locked into proprietary glass. There's a whole world of affordable, high-quality lenses you probably already own. The downside is you'll need to be mindful of the lens's focus motor and aperture control, because the camera's autofocus can only work with lenses that support electronic communication. Manual lenses will still function, but you lose the focus peaking overlay and the ability to set focus distance from the menu. Menu friction is something I keep an eye on because a clunky interface can turn a smooth live shoot into a series of frantic button presses. Blackmagic's